All right, good evening, everyone. I'm sure some more people will be coming in along the way, but it's 4 o'clock. So, to be respectful of your time, I thought we'd go ahead and get started. Welcome to week number 4 for PPA 500. As a hybrid course, things go by very quickly. So, after tonight, we'll be halfway through the course, if you can believe that. We are very fortunate this evening, as I told you, to have Kelly Janicek with us from the University Library. And Kelly is here to talk to you about how to do research in public administration, introduce you to some of the databases and some search tips and techniques that could be helpful for you as you move forward in the MPA program. While we do not do a lot of research here in 500 because it is very much an introductory type of course, in your future courses, you will be doing public administration related research. And so it's imperative that here, as you begin the program, you kind of learn how to do that type of research and the types of sources that you should be looking at. And there's no one better to do that for us than Kelly. And she's always very generous with her time to come into the 500 course and talk to you about these issues. And so we are very grateful to have you here, Kelly. And I'll just go ahead and turn the floor over to you. And if you need anything, I will be on mute and kind of in the background. So thank you again.
Thank you. Good evening, all. I think it's officially evening. I don't know when evening officially starts. I'll have to look that up. I'm a librarian. I can get the answer to that. Um, I'm Kelly Janicek. I am the librarian assigned to Public Policy Administration. I've been assigned to this program for a very, very, very long time. My whole history, I've been at the university and I've been here a long time. I also take care of other disciplines, but my background is actually in policy and law, just so you have a background idea of what my knowledge base is. At least that's what I studied. I don't know how much I practice some of that stuff anymore. But I want to do some things to get you guys, to help you all think about research. I may give you something new, may not. I hope I give you some new thoughts and ways of going about thinking about how to do this, because the way we do research has changed dramatically with the introduction of the web and all those search engines that exist out there. I'm going to try to help you make it more efficient. So you just spend hours and hours researching. You can do a couple hours and have your research done. And then you spend more time on actually studying and or writing the paper or policy or evaluation or whatever you may be doing with the program. I am going to open up PowerPoint because it keeps me from not forgetting anything, all that kind of stuff. So give me a moment and I will share the PowerPoint with you. I believe you can see it. Got lots of little things popping up. Zoom updated again, and it's amazing how it changes every time it updates. So I'm going to talk about research methodology. It's kind of an introduction. It's not the be all, but I do want to make sure you understand some concepts that you should make it easier for you if you didn't know them. So I'm going to review some research basics, which may be a big review for you, but maybe not. I'm going to talk about topic conceptualization now. With all the discovery tools we have, you get more stuff than you actually need. So the trick is to make sure your topic is configured in a way that you can focus it and not get a million hits and only get maybe 200,000 hits, shall we say. I'm going to review the sources, including different types of information that exist out there, because based on where you are in your research may determine what kind of type you start with because of the timing of everything. I am going to also help you start discovering information here at the library. We spend a lot of money on enhanced search engines, which we call research databases, that are probably better than what's out there. And then I'm going to cover the basics of citations. So you understand the basic of when you download a citation from APA style, the American Psychological Association, that you understand what you might have to fix in it, because they are not perfect when they download, because it's a computer and it's not smart enough to know. Then we're going to do a quick, can I do that situation? And let me go ahead and get started. Don't be shy about asking questions and or putting them in the chat I'm hoping I'll catch the chat. I have several windows open, so sometimes it won't show up, but I'm hoping. Okay. The hardest thing with searching with a computer is developing your vocabulary. And why do I say that? Um, I came across something. My example tonight is city government and economic agendas. Well, right there, we've got a problem. Is it a city government? Is it a local government? Is it a municipality government? The problem with the English language, it's so imprecise that you might get a lot of options depending on which database you go to for the terms they may use. And when you type something in, so last night someone typed in the best of. Well, best is subjective words, and it may or may not be what they use. They may say the number one, or the outstanding, or the example that might be, I don't know. So words that enhance or describe something aren't as good as real topic words or what I call subject words. So when you talk about your topic and ways to conceptualize it is, it's so big. Do you want to do a subset of it? And do you know what all the nuances are to your topic? Do you want to take your topic and link it with another topic or subject, shall we say? Is it too small? And I never find anybody who finds something that's too small. We even had the question of what's the relationship between painted ponies and theology? And we found 2 articles on it. Kind of small, but they got us started. And when I talk about tracking your subject, that might make a difference because there's so many more ways to take your topic and look at it. So conceptualizing it may include your vocabulary, what nuance is it? Do you want it from a political point of view, from an administrator's point of view, from a human resource management point of view? There's so many nuances to topics, and I want to make sure you think about where you want to take it and sit with it. I always review the computer searching tips because I find that not everybody realizes what they're doing. If you type in, and I had people last night that typed in, what were we talking about last night? Urbanization, comma, city transportation. Commas don't work, whether it's a search engine or our databases. If you typed in urbanization, city transportation, by default, it would put the word and between them. So each of those words would need to be in the article it's looking at or the reference it's looking at. But sometimes that's not the best thing to do. And I'm going to jump ahead to phrase searching because really I wanted urbanization and city transportation. I wanted it as the phrase city transportation. So I'm going to put that in quotes. So the words have to be right next to each other. That's not city over here and the transportation of busing over there, which isn't really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for city transportation. So phrase searching becomes very important. You can use that on search engines and our databases. Not as a feature that not a whole lot of people use, but it's a good thing that if you're looking at something and it's all about Nairobi, Africa, and you really want something more US oriented, you can say not Nairobi, and it'll take those articles out. The advantage is when we use our databases, our research databases, always on the left, they have refine or filters, which you can't get with a search engine. They are great. They maybe allow you to limit by geography, by population, by date, by, I can't think because each database has a different allowing you to refine by. So pay attention to what's there. You may get different refined options depending on how big your pot is and what's left in the pot. So now what you're doing with the computer is having you telling you what's available with these words. We refine it more precise, and this is how many of these words are used, or maybe subject headings. You can refine by subject headings, which is a more precise thing. Why do I say that? Because our databases are different than what's out there on the internet. The internet was set up to be a marketing tool. It's to sell you a thought, a concept, whatever. Our databases, and they self-promote what's on there. So an article may be in this one journal, but it's the only article there from that journal. Meanwhile, our databases index the journals that fit what they're indexing by concept or what their topic is, and they do it from page 1 to the most current page. First issue, page 1. So it covers every article in that journal and or magazine or newspaper, which is a real difference of what you will find. And that's why you might find something that you won't find on the internet. Most things you find on the internet, you will find in our databases. So it's just a matter of what way the pie is cut up. Okay. One of the other things I want to talk about is expanding your vocabulary. So I talked about city politics, municipality. Maybe I can use the word or. So I can quote city politics, unquote, or quote municipality politics, unquote. So both of those, I get whether they're together is an and, or they're just talk about one or the other, and it's there for me to use. I talk about subjects all the time. When you're using our research databases, you can't get this in through a search engine. Our research databases are really set up by subject terms. When that article is published, a human looks at it and determines what it's about. Not the words they used, but what the article is about. So I had an example for a while. I was doing, quote, environmental policy, unquote, and what was I doing? Environmental policy and California. An article showed up on the first screen. It talked about climate change in California and the governor's writing bills to fix it. Nowhere did it ever use environmental policy. Nowhere did it used California only because it had the indexing to the governor of California. But it was exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for laws and policy that was dealing with environmental policy and maybe climate change, which is a subset of environmental policy. But the human read it and determined it was about that, and the words were not being used that would actually help you find it. I'm going to stop right here and see if anybody has any questions. You can use the chat, you can raise your hand, you can open your mic. Do those kind of basics make sense? No, yes. Will I do a walkthrough on how to do search? I will. And at the end, I'll actually give you a sample and see if you can find an answer to it. So you'll get to also walk through the process.
So, Miss Kelly, in terms of what you mean by phrase searching, you mean like if you're looking for either a combined phrase or you're looking for two separate topics like rainbows and ponies, you would put rainbows in quotations and then ponies in quotations, or are
No,
they together?
if I'm talking about rainbow ponies as a phrase, that's the
Uh-huh.
name of the pony, then
Uh,
the rainbow, quote, rainbow ponies, unquote.
okay, got it.
If
Thank
I'm
you.
just looking for rainbows and talking about ponies, and I want both words to be there, I would do rainbows and ponies.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So it's
That's
not uncommon to do, say, quote, rainbow ponies, unquote, and theology, which was the original question.
oh, okay.
So, okay. So they were looking how theology talks about rainbow ponies, and doggone it, there's articles written on that. I'm always surprised what we can find. It's like,
Right?
there's you think there's something there? Somebody led him to believe there was, and doggone it, there was.
Funny.
So I get lots of interesting questions, just so you know. Thank
Thank
you for those
you.
questions. Anybody else have anything to make it so I can make it clear for you? I do it every day, so I assume it's clear to everybody, That's just my falsehood. Okay. Let me go and start sharing again. Okay. So let's talk about topics and understanding them. Your textbook, a reading, maybe something to help you understand the topic. But if you don't have that option, we have things like subject encyclopedias. And in your area, I've got 3 big ones. One is like 45 volumes. If it doesn't cover a subject in your area in there, I don't know what will. So you can look a topic up in there, and it'll take you to understand what it's about and where it fits and what the subcategories are, what the bigger picture is. And it also usually gives you a nice little bibliography at the end of the key sources that they feel the person who has the background on that topic actually sat down and said, you need to know about these because these are the key sources about the topic. So if you look at public administration, you would find the key source is a past president who wrote the definitive first article on public administration. That would be considered important information for someone to know about that topic. So I'm going to talk about those because I want you to be aware that they exist out there to help you. I just want to jump in with words, but maybe those aren't the words the discipline's using. Maybe the discipline is changing. And if I understand the topic enough to know that, oh, they used to call that outsourcing. Now it's called downsizing. The English language is constantly changing. So sometimes a word is picked up as a new phrase to call this, and that isn't what it originally started out as a concept, the topic started out with. I'm going to talk about annual reviews. They're actually a review of a topic. Someone took the topic apart and found out the literature that fits that topic, where the topic's been, where they see it going, things that may not have been addressed yet in the literature to talk about in that topic. And we actually get annual reviews. The other one is a literature review. You discover tools everywhere. So when you look at an article and you find that article that you really liked, sometimes it is a literature review, an overview of a subset of that topic. You can look at it'll give you an idea of what articles are there. It then leads you to things like who wrote that article. They're probably the authority in that topic. What did they use in their bibliography of sources that may also help you define that topic? And as life goes on, that article is written in, say, 2019. You can quickly track to find that 5 articles have been published since 2019 that cited that article for the basis of their research or changing knowledge. So now you're tracking who wrote the article, who supported the article in their references, who cited that article to take the literature forward. So a literature review can also help you kind of find where the literature may be. And any article you read, if you really, that's the article that's the most important to you, take that article apart for author, so you can find out what other articles they've written, because most article authors, when they start on a topic, they write a lot of stuff about that topic. Why start from scratch every single time? The references or the bibliography at the end of the article. And then I'll show you ways when I demonstrate to be able to check to see if anybody has cited that article in more contemporary times. Before I go further, does anybody have questions about that understanding how to take your topic apart. You're not a vocal group. Okay, but you ask questions. Good. Okay, now we're going to talk about different kinds of literature. And the reason why I talk about this is because sometimes when you're doing your research, it makes a difference over what you would start with. My best example is the newspapers. You see the row of newspapers there on a newspaper belt? That's the most current information. So if something happened yesterday, you will find it in a newspaper. You will probably not find it in a trade or professional journal or a peer-reviewed scholarly journal. It is the most current information. So sometimes your topic is so new that you may have to use newspapers. And we have newspapers. We have newspapers that are what we consider mainstream. We have newspapers that are alternative press. We even have the Long Beach Press Telegram and some of the local weekly newspapers. We have ethnic newspapers, or those that are written from a point of view that's not the mainstream. And we have a lot of those. So we have a lot of options in newspapers. Like I said, they're good for what happened and the most current information on it. Who's involved? So you can look people up, get their history, that kind of thing. That's what newspapers will do for you. In the middle of the screen, I got Journal, AWWA, and I got PA Times. Those are what I call trade or professional magazines, journals. They are not scholarly, but they do go through a peer review, then an editorial peer review. But they're the kind of things that get you articles on how we did this, how we succeeded, how we failed at it, what our profession needs to think about, because this is changing. I have a database that indexes by trade or professional journals. So you can get that information if you want something that's not really background research oriented, it's more advice or commentary or practical day-to-day events kind of thing. How we do this, how we do things. The cream of the crop is on the top, the Public Policy and Administration Journal. It is what we call a scholarly or, because it's used different ways, everybody has two words for it, peer-reviewed journal. More often it is a research. By the time you do your research, by the time you send it to the editor to have it peer-reviewed, and it usually goes out anywhere from 2 to 3 reviewers, they review it, send it back with recommendations, changes. They don't believe the outcome was right. The bibliography is missing things. References aren't all complete. The format doesn't make sense. Then it goes back for the author to change it. Then it goes to the journal to publish it. Then maybe 6, 7 months out, they publish it. So we're talking something that is not quick. It is not advice oriented or trends. It is research tend to be. And the value of it, there's a lot of controversy in this world with publishers and their peer review process. It has been discovered recently, more and more articles are being discovered to find out that they were not really what they said they were. Faculty need to publish peer-reviewed articles to get tenure, so they maybe fudged the results to get an article out of it. It made it through the peer review process, but they didn't actually set the methodology out and see if it really worked. But a person came along later and tried it again and couldn't get it to work and went to the head of the journal and said, this doesn't make sense. I can't get this to work. What's wrong? The publisher went back to the author and questioned them and discovered that, yes, they falsified the information. It is not accurate. The publisher says that's not the quality we expect in our journal, and they removed that article from the journal. If I have it online, I no longer have it. If I have it in paper, I still got the article. Some of those publishers took it further because some of them are truly into peer review, scholarly publications. And if they found any of their other authors cited that original article that was false, they removed their articles also for inappropriate research. Not that those people knew it, but they said it was following a bad research agenda, and that's not what they want. They want quality publications. So I call those the A++ papers. This will be probably the most common kind of information you'll need. I throw one at you, the one you probably will not use, but you need to know it's a type of information, is on the bottom. It's Daily Express, Mirror, Star. Those are what we call rags. You find them at the grocery store in the checkout line. When you're 7-Eleven or buying gas, they're there. They're fun to read. They're gossip. They're popular culture. Libraries collect them, but nobody indexes them. Just so you know, you won't come across them, but I want to make sure you realize that's another type of article that exists out there. From that, I'm going to tell you about what I call books or reports. These are like one-time publications. It's getting so with the internet, you can no longer tell if it's a book or a report. Biggest publisher in our country is the United States government. They have, as of January this year, they no longer publish anything in paper. It's all online. That means that a lot of the data can be swooped up to put in AI, which is a problem, but it's the reality of the beast. So a book may be also head of an editorial review process. Academic presses are considered editorial, peer-reviewed type journal books. The difference between what's out there on the internet and just filed as a report, you are the editor-in-chief. You have to figure out the biases, why it's there, what purpose were they pushing it, what their agenda is, because they are publishing it for the world to think or believe what they're saying. When I show you some sources tonight, I will show you some things of associations and organizations that have long been in the realm of publications, and their publications are fairly, not to say that anything doesn't have a bias, because it does, but you kind of know what you're getting when you work with their publications, and I'll show you how to do that. That's like American Divided Recovery. That's from, can't remember who published it, but it's like the college haves and have-nots kind of thing. The one on the bottom, the Sage Handbook of Public Administration, is an encyclopedia that's available to you, which I talked about a little bit. And I'm going to show them to you, okay, when we get there. Another type of information is people. Because they are pre-newspapers, man. They may know blogs. That stuff may get out before it gets published anywhere else. For most of your work in PPA, you probably won't use it. But when you're a working professional, you may actually find it very helpful. When you're looking for it, I'm going to show you some places that we have information. So like the example I used last night was the California Legislative Analyst Office. Their website gives you all their people that do research on particular things. And it gives you a link to their email. So a lot of the websites, if it's not under about to contact us, quite often they'll have a staff directory that tells you what kind of information professional they are and what they're doing for the organization that they're gathering the information for. So there's ways to get your handle on them. Don't forget social media. Boy, it's full of stuff. And a lot of our databases are actually indexing blogs from social media these days. So you're now finding it kind of verified, shall we say, by some of the vendors who recognize what these sources might mean and why you might need this information. Finally, a type is statistics. It's data, you need to interpret it. Sometimes it's time series over a long term. It can support your research. You can create it yourself if you do your own kind of evaluation, kind of polling. I've got even databases that help you set up questionnaires so you can get you can gather data by people. I'm gonna stop sharing. I hope the chat is open. Does anybody know what the longest running data set in the United States is? I'll let you think for a minute.
Is it the census?
It is the census. I told you the biggest publisher in the United States government, they count everything. The census is the one that counts the most. You're familiar with the census of population, which sets up our representation in Washington, D.C. for our state. But they do census of government, census of transportation, census of business, census of industry, census of this, census of that, census of that. They count a lot of things. And every so often it changes, but they do count a lot of data. So at one point you could get how many hours Americans leave by not taking their vacation time. You could get that data. And so I'm going to be talking about a research guide that leads you to points of information, data sets, data, information. Are there any questions about the different types of information? Okay, I'm moving on. You're making this too easy for me. It should be harder than this. Figuring out the research. For me, And I'm saying, I want it to be easy for you. Okay, can I go? So what we're going to do is start to discover information. And in the chat, I got to stop sharing a minute so I can do all the things I want to do. I am going to give you this research guide. And hold on, where did my... This is probably something you're going to want to bookmark because we have 350 databases. How are you going to know which in the library works for you? So each department has a research guide, and I'm going to show this, and it kind of focuses in the most efficient ones to use. So by discovering information, I'm actually, if you've been to the library, I am going, where's my screen that I want? It's been moved. Sure. So this is the library webpage. It's, you can, if you type in csulb.edu library, you get it, /library. Our version of a search engine is OneSearch. It is a dump of a lot of things off the web. More academically inclined. So here's an example. I was searching for city politics, something, and it got me some things to think about. Down here under, I don't know if you can tell that the lines are changing. We have databases and research guides. We recommend that you go to research guides. And we've got 184 just on subjects, not imagining how many other ones we've got. But if you type in the box PPA and hit search, the public administration or the link I gave you shows up. Okay. So with this in mind, I'm going to show you a couple different things that I want you to be aware of that are here that will help you. Based on the type of information I just talked about, these are the things that'll help. We're going to come back to citing tools at the end after you've had a chance to actually look at things. Maybe in a class you need to write an annotated bibliography. I've been asked that in the past, so here's some places to find out how to do that. How to read an article, specifically a scholarly article. People have asked me that. If you're coming from off campus, which you all are doing, if you have problems, access requirements will help you figure out things that might help you. Here I am. That's all my disciplines, just so you know. Those are all research guides also. So you can make a Zoom meeting. You can email me if you have questions. I can answer a lot of questions by email, and I'm going to talk about that near the end. But say you're in the middle of something right now, and it's at 1 o'clock in the morning, which we find a lot of our students do research time. I don't know if you see on the bottom of the screen, there's a little yellow and brown Ask a Librarian little tab there. It pops up. That is 24/7, 365 days a year. A librarian will pick it up and answer it for you. 1 to 3 a.m. our time, you're probably getting somebody in Australia, maybe Hawaii. I can't tell. I never look up the time difference. They will probably ask the same things I ask at 11 a.m. on Monday mornings when I get all the people from Britain, because it's 1 a.m. in the morning for them. What are you looking for? What can't you find? What words do you use? Where did you look? So be prepared to answer those kind of questions, because we're going to try to find what you can. They will try to find what you need to get you going. But if something comes up and they can't, and occasionally I get stumped. I don't know they got a couple databases I've never seen before, and I don't know how they would work differently, or if they would work for this situation. I set up a ticket that goes back to their library, and the next business day that a librarian there will pick it up, and we will get online and we will go over what you need to do, or send you an email about what you need to do that will answer your question. Okay. So never not, we have your back. Let's put it that way, whenever you may need it. And that's what's on the homepage. The next part I'm going to talk about is get sources. And that's probably the majority of what you're going to do. And I don't know if you want to bookmark this one. It's instead of public admission /sources. This is the databases that I recommend for most of your research. So instead of 350, you've got 4 here. You've got 2 different ones from the other 4. And then you've got 2 different ones here. Do you see the little tabs I'm clicking on to find the articles by the databases? So I'm going to go through and demonstrate this, and I want you, because I want you to know the nuances. If you notice the little in front of each name of the database, they've got a little symbol. That's the vendor. So different vendors they look a lot alike, but they don't. So that's just so you know what you're aware of who it is. If you don't know what it's going to do, the little I gives you a good definition of what it's good for. So the first one, it's not even alphabetical. The first one is public administration abstracts. This covers your public administration journals, period. Covers from issue 1 to page whatever the current issue is. If there was a change in title in it, they cover it. It covers international public administration journals. So I want to make sure you're familiar with this one, because you will find this one probably the most helpful for scholarly peer-reviewed articles. Okay. So remember I talked about and or not. It helps you with that. Just go ahead and start typing, and remember phrase searching or whatever. So maybe I want something on city politics, or I can jump down to the next box, economics or economy maybe. Well, I don't know what I want, so I'm going to add a star. So everything after the letter M, economy, economical, all those kind of things. Going to hit search. I only get 4. That's okay. But what 4 do I have? Well, this first one's a book. The second one's out of South Africa. This one is a news article and also a news article. Not quite what I wanted. But maybe I wanted economic development, or maybe I'm using the wrong words by using city politics. Maybe I need to broaden my topic. City and government and I got 919. Do you see the difference of the phrase search limited to only city politics? If I put city and politics, I probably would have gotten different results. So actually, let's do that. City and politics. I got 221. The first one, of course, is the phrase, but the rest of them are not. So I'm using my refine on the left. I want peer-reviewed articles. I dropped 167. Languages, I got one Croatian. You're going to start seeing a lot of those. What I want is my subject. I have 28 articles on cities and towns. State of the United States got 28. Economic development is 23. Local government. See, I use cities. Did I mean cities and towns and local government? And is there anything else? Metropolitan government. I got actual cities. I got city councils, county government. I'm down to 57. Because remember, when you refine it, it's going to narrow down unless you put an or in there. So I'd have to go back and or that in those terms if I wanted more. But truthfully, there's 10 on this page. There's 5, 6 pages of them. I know most of you guys won't go past the first 2 pages because they're by relevance. The computer looked at how many times the word was used, how it was used, and then they ranked them. You can change it to be the newest source, the oldest source, the author, whatever. But what do I have? Consequences of factors of disclosure local level. That's Canadian. I don't want Canadian. Economic development. New economic spaces. So now my author's given credibility here. It tells me where the article is. It tells me that it has a scholarly article will have images and all sorts of stuff. My phrases by this indexing tool. But the author also has the right to put in other words. So maybe I want to be El Estilo. I want it in Spanish. Because they want in all languages. This then tells you what the article's about. And if I like it, because the article looks like it is in multiple languages, because it's regional studies. I then have it. I know that it's a peer-reviewed article because they have a DOI down here. A digit object identifier, DOI, is a sign that it is a peer-reviewed or scholarly article. Trade publications will not have them. Professional publications will not have DOIs. Academic press books chapters will have DOIs, but it's kind of like a new thing that kind of determines what they are. I'm in luck. The article is full text here, both in PDF or HTML. So I now have kind of things. The other thing I might want to do to help myself is every time I see an article I want, add it to a folder. Because I don't want Israel. This is logo. Add it to a folder. So before I leave, Montreal, Southeast Asia, Jersey, and Detroit, I go to the top of my screen and I take my folder. And I say, I do want all those. And I'm going to email them. Going to put my email address in these. And then I'm going to tell it to send me at least the PDFs. But sometimes they don't have a PDF page. The other thing I'm going to say is change my citation format and tell it I want APA. So now you're start your bibliography, your reference tools. We're going to talk about how you're going to have to edit them, but at least you downloaded them so you have them. And I send it to myself. Make sure I have my email address in there. Does anyone have any questions about how that database works at this point? It's not a very big database because in your discipline, there's only like 200 journals. So it's not a very big database, but it's there for you to use. Okay. I got some thumbs up. We're getting there. So let me tell you about, because I saw one of the articles there. I'm going to go back. I noticed that this first one, business improvement districts and contemporary local governance, is not full text. Never, ever, ever limit yourself to full text only. Remember, I have 350 databases. So I'm going to go get this article in state and local government review. Do, 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 do. It tells me that, yes, I have it. I have it here. Most 4 years are not available. Uh-oh, that's 2020. It may or may not be there. I also have it here. When I go here, yes, decline all. I don't want to. It will give me my DOI. I can also cite it here. I can download the article. I've got the article now. Okay. If by chance, close that one down. Close that one down. I gotta watch. Oh my God, right here. Same screen. No, we're not on the same screen. There we are. Okay. If by chance, my folder. Let's go back to the citations. Here's this one that's Slavic. I don't have it. I may not have it. How many times on Google or any other search engine it says, if you want this article, please pay $50. We're doing the $50 for you. We're buying the article. I want this one. So I'm going to sign in for more options. And if you have a tab at the top of your screen that has your single sign-on open, it should bypass it and let you in. And you want to do that. We'll get the article for you in 24 hours. Sometimes 32, but 24 hours is our goal. We'll pay for it. We'll get it. We'll give you a link to go get it out of Beach Reach, which is where we have to house it for 30 days and then destroy it. That's copyright law. So we say when you get your article and your email comes in, go ahead and download it so you have it. You don't lose it because it will not last the whole semester. Like I said, 24 hours, it's like, wow, we didn't even have 24 hours last year. This is like brand new. We're paying extra to get something that gets you what you need now, as quick as we can get it now. Realize that this article may be in the language Croatian. It may have been the Croatian article. We do not translate for you. You get it in the language it's published in. So you'll have to figure out how to take care of that one. Questions about how to get articles that may not be in-house, or if they are in-house, how to go get it at CSULB. Does that make sense? Okay. You're a quiet bunch. Let me go back to, we changed our access. So on the research guide, I also have politics database, which is different. Publisher, so it doesn't look quite the same. But politics, it's political science journals, which includes some public administration journals. There is some overlap in the indexing of both public administration abstracts and politics database. But the other thing in politics database is it has policy index and public affairs information service index in it. It's got a couple different subsets in it. The reason why I mention that, if you're taking the policy class where you have to talk about policy, politics database, those subsets will actually help you find policy that may be published out there. They are indexing not necessarily journal articles, they're indexing reports, things that might be policy oriented. So I want to make sure you realize that that's there. ABI Inform, American Business Index. I do want to show you this one because this is the one that indexes your trade and professional journals. So if I go back to my city and politics and economics or economy or whatever, I search it. I'm not going to limit to peer review, remember, because those kind of trade publications are not peer reviewed. How many did I have? Good heavens. I hit with 881. Okay. So if I just limit it to trades on how we did that, I still have 38,000. I get reports, blogs, working papers. Are you seeing all the options I've got now? I'm going to apply it. Then what am I going to do? Maybe change my date, maybe do subjects. I could do locations in this database. Maybe I only want California. So do I have California or a California city? I do. I have 298 just in California. And Los Angeles quite often, San Francisco and Los Angeles quite often show up. They're big enough that they get a lot of articles about them. I'm down to 572. I'm not going very fast down. Okay. So, this might help you narrow or focus it. Okay. I'm talking about Pacific. Let's go to 75 for cities. Most of these and almost all of these are full text, but they're HTML. Occasionally you will see one that's PDF, just so you know. International Railway Journal from the International Railway Association. Here's your Orange County business journals in here because this is a business database. Okay. The other thing these people do is they do suggested other articles. People who looked at this article also looked at some of these, which maybe they use different words to get there. Got them this article and these other ones. So that now you're discovering other options that exist out there. These are the subject headings with this one. Maybe I want to now narrow it down to fiscal years. Maybe I want to do fees and charges. I can do another search and change it and refine it again or start all over. It works differently. Each database does work differently. This one does your trade. So this is an example of business leaders pushing in San Diego a business licensing fee for small companies as a way to do some economic development. Questions? Are you ready to discover other information types? I, of course, have got to change screens here. I am back to the research guide I talked about. And under sources, I talked about the encyclopedias for your discipline. They're down there underneath the databases. So I can look up a topic in any one of these, and it will help me find and understand my topic to get the right language, the vocabulary, some sources thrown in there, and define the topic to where I want to go with it. Out there on the web, there's lots and lots of stuff. So based on what I've been asked from your department, students have asked me over the years, there are these 5 things that have come up. And I've gone out and found sources on the web that address these. So these would be your reports. So International County Management Association does finance and budgeting information. So this would be web-based materials. And they give me some things to look at. Here's some research reports, state and fiscal facts. Sometimes it's data-driven, sometimes it's research-oriented. So that's where a place you can kind of start to get some of these sources so you don't have to go look for them on the web. These are the topics, but I can always add. I took one away this last time. Nobody was using it anymore. It was popular probably 5-6 years ago. But we talked about, here's the LAO. I probably should have done. Should have showed this. So here is the organization. And I want to know if there's anybody there I can contact. So about them talks about their history, their practices, what their advocacy is. So you now get their biases, what they're really pushing, public policy, work with us, careers, requests for, their leadership team. Should be some people. Okay. Email address and what they do. So now you get an idea who they are. So that will help you find people. Is that fair enough? And most major websites, specifically those that I recommend, do that for you because they're legitimate organizations that we're very familiar with. Let's talk about policy sites. There is a class that has a policy assignment, and I kind of mentioned this with a politics database, the fact that it has policy stuff in it. I don't come to the class, you're on your own. But here are some databases I recommend. CQ Magazine and Congressional Digest do national level policy. They're kind of watchdogs of DC kind of things. There's a website out there on public agendas, so it might give you policy. We're aware of other things that might lead you to policies. I have some books. And then there's some directories on those organizations that do policy making. Some are by librarians, Oregon, Tulane. Some are by organizations. You can look up in these by topic and find out who might be writing policy about that topic to help you find more sources to look at their web pages, to see what policies they're writing, to see what they're trying to influence, that kind of thing. That's something I provide for you guys that you might find helpful. The other course you may get is program evaluations. Again, I don't come to the class, but here's some things that I recommend, including another database. I recommend how to kind of use the phraseology. Notice how they're in quotes with a little star to get all the evaluation, evaluating, whatever things. I recommend Google for this one. A lot of program evaluations are published on the web, specifically by local governments and things like that. Remember, OneSearch is our version of Google, and you might find some in there because we are a federal and state depository of all their documents. So they're online. There's some books on how to read about policymaking. As a graduate students, I always want to mention statistics. So we have research methods that help you figure out if you're going to do a statistical analysis or how to read one. Here's some actually statistical databases and research guide to statistics that are actually number-based kind of data sets and or data. If you're doing research and you need an instrument, we have places for that, including books on how to do that, as you notice on the left-hand side. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and see if I've gone too fast. Does that make sense? Questions? Maybe, did I understand this? Did you really say that I could get that article for free? Yes, I said that.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good point. I didn't know that those articles
Yeah.
that required payment, that we could actually get them.
So whatever class you're in, while you're enrolled at CSULB, we're buying them for you. I'm sorry to say, once you leave the university, it's a different.
Great. And then it was just like we just click on the button
Yeah.
to
If
get
it's
that
not there
article.
full text,
Okay.
that little box that said get the article is right there.
Okay.
The one thing you'll ask you to do, when's the last day you need the article? So say you order the article at 7 p.m. tonight or 5 o'clock tonight. They hope they'll have it in 24 hours. But if you need it like at 3 o'clock tomorrow, they probably won't. You know what I mean? They are pretty much 24 or less. But if you're giving them a short time frame, they may come back and just say, we can't get it that fast. Okay?
Got
Because
it. Thank you.
first we'll go to another library and see if they can get it for us. That doesn't cost us anything, or then we'll have to purchase it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're cutting our budget, so we're trying to save money whenever we can. Other things? Yeah, it's a lot of stuff, but I've cut it down to this little slice of the pie. It's not the 148 discipline piece of the pie. You're only doing one discipline of the pie. It's not to say if you come in and you're doing stuff on transportation, guess what? We got a research guide on transportation because the College of Engineering does a lot of transportation research. So there may be something else on there on that list of research guides that you might find also helpful. I'm going to do another share because I want to make sure you understand about citing tools and things of that nature. So where did I go here? Share. Okay, we talked about discovering because we actually did the research guide, and I talked about getting sources. So basics of APA, the 7th edition. I highly recommend while you're in the program, you get a copy of the APA manual. I have, it's currently not in my office. Someone walked off with it. I always have one usually. We have several at the reference desk. During COVID, they made pieces of it available for free, but then when we went back, they didn't anymore. You can get it off Amazon used. Make sure you get the 7th edition and not the 6th edition. It changed enough that the 7th makes a difference. And because of the 7th edition, they are the ones that developed, the American Psychological Associations are the ones that developed the DOIs, which have become the standard. It's very helpful. So on the home page, I have citing guides. So some of the things I'm going to show you in the next 2 screens are from that page on the home tab. We have bibliography managing software. We have EndNote that we purchased for the university. It's not our favorite, but we get it. We also do classes in Mendeley and Zotero. Those are ones that you can get free. They attach to a web browser. One attaches to Firefox, one attaches to, I can't remember. I don't use them enough to know who they attach to. They're attached, they're there. So when I ask for a citation, it'll keep it for me and it'll put you in APA. But do they really put you in APA? What you're looking for is an author's by their last name, initials, because you'll have to maybe change that. The year, the date. These are examples. And because I'm showing you to them, I'm going to show you examples that I actually download this citation from the database. Remember, even in OneSearch, you can download citations. A lot of the databases. The issue is it's not always accurate. The obvious problem is the DOIs. The top of the screen shows you the correct way they should be put in. And why anybody does dx.doi when you can do doi.org. I don't understand, but that's what they do. What you might get is what looks under incorrect. They will try, because it's coming from a database that has to go through a security wall. They're trying to tell you where the security wall is. You know, it's doi.org. And then you go on and put in the alphanumeric coding. Okay. And you have to put the HTTPS. I even have an HTTP with no S, I found one time. Has to be an S, like the top two examples. So in public administration abstracts, I found this article from Australia in the Public Finance Review. I clicked on the Get It at CSULB button. I found that I do have it, full text in Sage Premier. I clicked on it. Because this article came out in 2001, publishers like Sage, who truly think peer-reviewed is very important, they went back and gave DOIs to all those previously 2017 articles published. So you may not get it in the index because it was pre the evolution. But when you go back to the publisher or the actual reference, it will show if there's a DOI there, because when I cited it, my DOI comes up. Okay. So this is what it should look like. Capitalization is very important, because if you look at the name of their article, they have it in upper lowercase. And when they did the recommended citation, they have it in upper lowercase. They put it all in uppercase. And I'm sorry to say, APA is fussy about that. Whoops, where did you go? First word is capitalized. Any proper names are capitalized. Or if it comes after colon, it starts as another first word. Everything else is lowercase words. That quite often you have to change. My journal is italicized and it's in upper cases for the name. Volume number is italicized. The issue number is not. First page dash last page. ABI Inform is an online database that's been around since the 70s. So sometimes you'll see implicit finance gambling expenditures starts page 326, 32 pages. They will give you how long the article is. They will not give you the last page. And then my DOI that I picked up when I looked at the vendor actual article to see it. Does this make sense? So some of the newer articles, 2011, this one actually got this vendor for the database to add their DOIs. So some of them are there. Okay, I'm looking at the chat. And as you look at that, first reference, which was an article citation that I downloaded from Public Administration Abstracts, what is wrong with it?
There are some words that should not have capital letters in the
That
first
is
letter.
correct. There's also some proper nouns in there, so you need to be aware of which ones. Federal is capitalized. Strategy should be in lowercase. Induced in lowercase. Resistance in lowercase. States in lowercase. Participation in lowercase. ACA Health Exchange is a proper law or name that needs to stay in uppercase. Okay? I know. Confusing, confusing, confusing. From ABI Inform, I downloaded this citation, not including the little question marks that was there. Those are supposed to be asterisks. What is wrong with that reference that I would have to correct?
Is it that there's no page numbers?
Well, note that it's an online publication, so there probably will not be page numbers, but you're close. Yeah, the retrieve from. No one can ever find that. So when you retrieve from something like ABI Inform, all you have to say is retrieve from ABI Inform. The person now knows where to go look for it, and they'll have to find it based on the title. Does that make sense? Because this is like a blog thing. It's an online environmental benefit advisor blog. Okay, does that make sense? It's a little different because blogs are retrieved from, they tell you where you got them. And you're retrieving from ABI Inform. You're retrieving from a database. The final one on the bottom from politics database. I love this one. What's wrong with it?
Everything is all caps.
You got it. So all needs to be capitalized, but LL should be lowercase. Everything else should be lowercase. Notice this one doesn't have a DOI because it is a trade professional journal. Remember, they're not peer reviewed, so they will not have DOIs. Okay. Does this make a little bit more sense? These are actual examples that are there that you will have to fix. And I seldomly see one that you don't have to fix in some way because they're gathering the information from the database, and the capitalization is always the problem more than anything else. And the DOIs that it wants to do something to. Questions, you can contact me. You can ask for a Zoom meeting. That's me. But I told you on the front page of the guide, my box is down there at the bottom. Okay, I want to test you. So do we have any questions about any of this yet? Or should we wait till after you get the test? You see if you can do it. Okay, you've got, I hope you have the research guide open and you've clicked on the sources tab from the left because you're actually going to go in and do something. I am going to put in, as soon as I copy it here, other page. I have a Google form that I'm putting in the chat for you to open up. And then based on what month you're born in, those that are born in January to March, you'll do the water. Those that are born in April or May will do budget. Those that are June and July will do parks. Born in August or September, you'll do waste. And those that may be born in October through December, you'll do the 4 E's. So when you click on it, it will open up. And then when you click on which topic you chose, it will ask you a question. And then it'll ask you, words you used. How did you put them in there? Database that worked. Did you find by using some of the refines a better word to use or subject? Then can you get a citation in APA and correctly put it from APA in the citation link, the last comment. So I'm going to let you go ahead and start, but this is your chance to either put in chat privately to me if you don't want anybody to know. Publicly is fine, or raise your hand or whatever to see if this is where now it's, do you really understand what I talked about? Is where I'm going. I see you're starting to answer. You're not putting much in there. You're just, you don't, I'm not seeing. I noticed that somebody didn't use words, they put in a sentence. That doesn't always work real well with our research databases, unlike Google or a search engine, because it knows to drop it out. That's why I talked about the and, the or, the not, to link the words together. So I want to make sure you understand. I see people like Academic Search Complete. I understand that. But you guys are past Academic Search Complete. That's for the undergrad who doesn't know what they're doing. It's a good place to start. So I'm hoping that you will think about things like public administration abstracts, politics database, ABI Inform to be more realistic for what you're looking for. Okay. Is anybody struggling? Question? I see you're kind of getting there, popping up with things. If you're gonna use, I see someone use, there's the one question about the 4 E's, empathy and ethics. They use the quotations about empathy and ethics. That's actually really good, very insightful, because if they typed in empathy and ethics, they would have gotten all the articles about empathy, all the articles about ethics, and all the articles that talked about empathy, ethics in the same article. They would have gotten too much stuff. So when a phrase has the word and in it, that's a good time to use the quotation marks. Really good. Anybody else? Questions? Are you struggling? I don't want this. I want to make sure I threw a lot of stuff at you and I want to make sure something sticks with you. Other than you don't have to pay $50 for an article. Boy, a lot of you guys have your birthdays at the end of the year. Um, I think I'm starting to, it looks like you're starting to get it. I have several people that are finding some good stuff. Some of you found other words to use. That's always helpful. By refining it to a subject heading. That makes the article a more precise. They may be just using the words, which may not exactly be what the article's about, and that's very important. Why have to look at all those articles and just use the words when you want the article that's about those words? I don't see any questions in the chat. It looks like a couple of you, about 6 of you, have figured it out. I'm not grading this. There's no right or wrong answer, but I want you to get a feel for if you understand what I'm talking about. So if there are no more questions or concerns, I remind you that you can email chat, ask a librarian, or on that home tab of the research guide for public policy administration, there's ways to email me. Usually I will, if I'm not off, and you will get a reply if I'm not available. I'm off hours. I have some things coming up that I may be gone a little bit. But I will make sure my email replies and let you know that. And I think, Dr. Powell, we have completed enlightening these people on the power of research.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Kelly. And it's great information. We're going to be using this information throughout the rest of the time in the program, even if we don't use a lot here in this course. But I always say every time Kelly comes in that this is probably the most useful session that you're going to have throughout your entire time in the MPA program. So we're very fortunate that Kelly was able to take time out of her busy schedule, as she always does, to come and present this information to us. So thank you again so much, Kelly. Truly, truly appreciate it.
See, I'm looking for future librarians. They get their MPA and then they'll get the MLIS, and we'll just have a whole lot of people.
There you go. It's a good recruitment tool. Perfect.
Okay, I'm
Thank
going to
you.
sign off. I'm glad you found this helpful. That's all I can say. And like I said, You may forget as much as I told you, but you have ways to ask a question and have somebody help you recalculate what you need to do. Okay? I know
Perfect.
you're going to make them go back to class. Ooh.
I know, I'm so mean. Thanks,
Bye.
Kelly. Bye. Take care. Okay, everyone, I'm looking at the clock and it looks like we're about due for a break. So let's go ahead and take a break. We'll say take a break until 5:40. Come back at 5:40, and I want to go over the midterm assessment with you, just to make sure we're all on the same page with the scenarios that we're going to be answering. And then after we do the midterm assessment, then I want to talk to you a bit about public versus private organizations and kind of get you ready then for your next Canvas essay that is coming due next week. So take a break until 5:40, come on back, and we'll do those items. Okay, welcome back from break. Now what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time going over the midterm assessment. I made this available on our Canvas side, I think about a week ago. And as we discussed in our class last week, we're going to extend the due date for this for 1 week. So instead of having it due next Wednesday, we'll have it due the following Wednesday. So you'll have 2 weeks from tonight to complete the midterm assessment. And I'm doing that because I want to make sure we cover all the information in class that you will need in order to answer these 5 scenarios. And so I came to the realization that we're certainly not going to get through all the information tonight. So I'll give you that extra week so that next week we'll finish up all the information that's covered in the midterm assessment. And then you'll have the following week after that to work on the assignment. So you have it due 2 weeks from tonight instead of 1 week from tonight. But I always find it useful for us to go through the midterm assessment as a class to make sure everyone understands not just what the scenarios are in the assessment, but some of my expectations in terms of your answers for those scenarios. Now, even though every now and then I slip up and call this an exam, it really is not an exam, it's an assessment. And as an assessment tool, it is meant to afford you the opportunity to take the information that you've acquired here in this course and then apply that information to a somewhat practical scenario in the public sector. So these scenarios are scenarios that I write, so they're original scenarios. You can find them in books or online or anything. And I'm not expecting you to go out there and do outside research. You'll just use the information that you've been presented in the course and then apply that information appropriately for each one of these scenarios. So you don't have to do any outside research for this. This is truly an assessment type of tool. So on this assessment, we have 5 scenarios, and there are then 2 questions related to each scenario. And I don't think we went through the midterm yet. So let's go ahead and do that just for a few minutes here. Let me walk you through the scenarios and then talk about the type of information you're going to be using to then answer the questions related to each of these scenarios. Now, number 1 is not really as much of a scenario as is kind of a declarative statement. So as discussed in class, the Constitution received ratification from the requisite number of states relatively quickly. However, New York was slow to ratify. The goal of developing the Bill of Rights and writing the Federalist Papers was to convince the citizens of New York and the Anti-Federalists to support this new Constitution. The work we currently do as public administrators is directly affected by the liberties and freedoms incorporated in the Bill of Rights. So question 1A, select 3 freedoms discussed in the Bill of Rights and discuss how these freedoms affect the work of public administrators. The choice of those 3 freedoms, those 3 civil liberties, completely up to you. You want to talk about, freedom of speech or freedom of press or freedom of religion or freedom of assembly in the First Amendment. If you want to talk about the right to bear arms in the Second Amendment, privacy protections such as protection against quartering soldiers as in the Third Amendment, protections against unreasonable search and seizures, protection against double jeopardy and self-incrimination, and so on and so on. Select 3 of those from the Bill of Rights and then discuss how they have an impact upon the work we do as public administrators. And this is really going to revolve around this idea of qualified good faith immunity that we talked about over the past 2 weeks. So as administrators, we have qualified good faith immunity, which means we have to know and then endeavor not to violate the rights and the liberties in the Constitution. I think I see a hand. So Alondra, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah. So is this paper on Canvas already?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Is this the one that's supposed to be on the midterm assessment?
Yes.
Okay. I just opened it and it says final assessment, and it's completely different from what you're reading right now.
I wonder if maybe it's the wrong link on there. So let me real quick go and take a quick look. I think I have it open here. So it may just be the incorrect link, which I can fix very quickly. Let's move some stuff around. Okay. All right. Hopefully I'm still logged in. So let's see. Go down to modules. And if so, then you just got a preview of the final. So let's see. Yep, you're right. That's the wrong link on there. So I'll make that adjustment. I can probably do it right here.
Okay.
So you
Thank
can
you.
kind of watch the sausage being made here. So let me just go and do the right one. Thanks for pointing that out. I didn't realize that that had happened here. Okay, go document, we'll upload a document. So kind of getting to see behind the curtain of how files are added. And there it is. Okay. That worked. Okay, let's do it this way. One more second and it will hopefully magically appear. You might have to refresh the page, but save it. And okay, there it is. So it should be fixed now. Thanks for pointing that out for me, but should be up and running for you. If you still can't see it, let me know, but I think it should be there.
Yeah,
Okay.
it works now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hopefully you can, I've tried to go back then to the midterm. Can you see the midterm assessment on your screen? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Because sometimes when I go back and forth between pages, the current page doesn't show up. And so, okay, so in this first quote unquote scenario, in the first question, you're talking about 3 of those freedoms from the Bill of Rights, how they affect the work of public administrators. Then in the second question, we're looking at Federalist 39. And we spent some time in class talking about Federalist 39 and the argument that Madison made. And so what I want you to do is to reflect on Federalist 39 and select 3 of the arguments that Madison made in Federalist 39 to convince anti-federalists to support the new Constitution. We talked about how he deconstructed the Constitution, kind of went into the component elements. So just pick 3 of those arguments that he made for your answer to 1B. Now, in terms of your answers to these questions, as we've said before in this class, we are a public administration program, and so therefore we really believe in being as concise as possible and being as parsimonious as we can be. So in terms of your answers here, I'm looking at maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs for each one of the questions, and that will certainly suffice. If you want to go beyond that, you certainly can, but it's not necessary. 1 to 2 paragraphs for each one, I think, is certainly going to be good enough. Then in scenario number 2, we have the city of South Terra Verde as a quickly growing community adjacent to a large metropolitan area. South Terra Verde has decided to construct a large public park in the center of town to accommodate the recreation needs of its growing population. The city council has been discussing this issue for the past 2 months and plans to discuss the purchase of land for this park again at their next council meeting, with a possible vote on the purchase also scheduled for this same meeting. Councilmember Hayes recently, as of last week, purchased a tract of land within the area for the proposed city park. Councilmember Hayes plans to participate in this discussion and vote on the city's purchase of the land. So not only is he going to engage in the discussion, but he also plans on voting on the city's decision to purchase the land. 2A, if Mr. Hayes participates in the discussion and votes on the proposed land purchase, what principles in the ASPA Code of Ethics would this potentially violate and why? And then in 2B, are you concerned about Mr. Hayes's purchase of the land? Why or why not? This really gets at the whole public versus private type of orientation. Then scenario number 3, we have the Midtown Unified School District has seen a student population increase by 40% over the past 2 years. The growth is forecast to continue for the next 10 years due to development within the city's jurisdiction. Faced with this exponential growth in student population, the district needs to construct new schools quickly. The district decides to construct a school on the east side of the city by funding the school with bonds. When cities borrow money, it's called issuing bonds, and so they're going to borrow money to build this school. The construction costs for this school are estimated to be $65 million, and construction should take about 18 months. The district also entered into an agreement with the developer to construct another school on the western edge of the city. That school will be completely built by the developer with little to no district interaction. The school will be identical to the school to the east and is estimated to cost $45 million and to take 12 months to complete. Question 3A, what explains the discrepancy in the time to completion and the cost between the two schools? And then in 3B, what are some of the disadvantages to allowing a private sector developer to construct the school on the west side of the city? So the information you'll use to build your answers to these 2 questions will come primarily from our discussion we're going to have in a couple of minutes, looking again at the differences between public and private sectors and public and private organizations. Then number 4, as we know, Woodrow Wilson's classic article, The Study of Administration, which we will read for next week, and we'll get into a discussion of it in class next week, formed the basis for a separate field of study of the study of administration. One of the enduring concepts that emerged from the article was the idea of a politics-administration dichotomy. 4A, describe Wilson's argument for why we need a separate study of public administration. And then 4B, describe the politics-administration dichotomy and why this dichotomy is no longer as valid as it once may have been. So again, you're going to be reading that article for our class next week, and we'll discuss that article next week. So once we're done with the class next week, the first half of class next week, you'll have the information you need to address number 4. And then the final scenario here is the Department of Housing in the city of Tyler Heights is a large old organization in the state of New Mexico. Its primary function is to make adequate and affordable housing available to income-eligible residents in the city. As an older organization, the Department of Housing has developed an extensive set of policies and procedures. Employees are held accountable and evaluated based upon how closely they adhere to these policies. Employee turnover is high as employees feel that they are not valued and have few opportunities to develop their skills through training. There is very little vertical and horizontal communication that's occurring within the organization. Question 5A, select 2 classical organization theories or theorists that you feel would benefit the organization and discuss these theories and why they would be beneficial. And then in 5B, select 2 neoclassical organization theories and theorists that you feel would benefit the organization and why those theories would be beneficial. This is information on organization theory that we will cover in the second half of class next week when I introduce you to the evolution of public administration literature. And we'll talk about the evolution of the literature, starting with classical theorists like Weber and Taylor and Gulick, the principal school, and moving through more modern theorists such as human relations theory, human resource management theory, systems theory, organization culture, and what we really call the more neoclassical types of theories. All of those theories we're going to talk about next week that come after the classical theories fall within this category known as the neoclassical theories. And so all the information you then need to address scenario number 5, you'll get all that information in the second half of class then next week. Hence the reason why we are putting off the due date for the midterm exam for an additional week, so you'll have a chance to be exposed to this information in class next week. So that is the midterm assessment. Do you have any questions or any need for any clarification on any of these scenarios at this current point in time? I know you haven't had a chance to look at them on your own, but any preliminary questions on the midterm assessments?
Dr. Powell, I was just wondering, considering that we just went through like the library research and things like that. I mean, I don't see it in here, but do you think we would need to cite any outside sources or anything like that other than, the papers that you've already uploaded or the docs you've already uploaded to
Yeah.
to the site?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably not. If you are answering the question in a way that you're bringing in additional information that perhaps we haven't talked about in class, that could be information that you might want to cite, because if there's any information, the way in which I look at the information you're using on this assessment is that if it's information that we have covered in class, it's kind of common knowledge for all of us. And so therefore it doesn't need to be cited. But if you're bringing in additional information to support your answer that we haven't discussed in class, then that is something that you might certainly want to cite.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Adding on to Elaine's question, so we don't need to do any in-text citation or like a reference page for any of the materials that we learned about in class?
Not for this assignment, no, because it is an assessment. So it's not necessary to have your traditional reference page like you would have if you're doing a research paper.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it might be easier for you. I've got, this is a Word document now that it's actually on our site. It's a Word document, so you can just download the document and you can just insert your answers directly into this document. If you want to put your answers in kind of a different color, like with blue font or red font or something like that, you can certainly do that. But I think it might just make it easier for you so you don't have to retype things. Just put your answers directly into this document. Okay, let me share out some slides for tonight. I know we're pushing 6 o'clock, but I still think we can get through the information we need to for this evening, and then we'll leave the rest of these slides then for class next week. So as soon as my slides come, there we go, they're cooperating. So what I'd like to do over the remaining amount of time that we have tonight is to talk about public administration and some of the differences between studying public organizations versus studying private sector organizations. So public administration is something that we encounter on a daily basis. We know that pretty much every single aspect of our lives, whether it be the cars we drive, or whether it be the food we eat, or the medicine that we take, or the roads we drive on, just about every aspect of our lives will be touched in one way or another by governmental organizations. So public administration really is all around us and we encounter it everywhere. Since everyone encounters public administration in just about everything they do on a daily basis, public administration and bureaucracies really have become very much the source of a whole lot of debate. And we have people talking a lot, oftentimes very negatively, about government and about bureaucratic organizations. When we are studying public administration, we are at the very heart studying public bureaucracies. And public bureaucracies are essentially public organizations. So what do we study when we study public administration? We're primarily studying public organizations. And within these public organizations, we are studying the formal, rational systems of relationships among persons vested with administrative authority to carry out public programs. Now, that's a very long-winded definition of what public bureaucracy is. But if we deconstruct it, we can kind of see some of the important elements of the definition. So when we study public organizations, we're studying formal, rational systems of relationships. Important words there are formal and rational. These are formal relationships. These are relationships that are relatively static in terms of, you think about an organization chart. If you're working currently in an organization, I'm sure your organization has an organization chart. That organization chart will spell out the relationships between all the different positions within the organization. It's a formal type of document. Also, our bureaucracies, our organizations tend to be very rational in nature. We make decisions, we base our decisions upon empirical evidence. We'll have written rules and regulations. We'll have written policies and procedures, and those rules and regulations and policies and procedures will then guide our decisions and our behaviors on a daily basis. We're not just making decisions because we feel like doing something in a certain way on a given day. We're making these decisions because they are spelled out in our policies and our procedures. So it's formal and it's rational, and it's a system of relationships among people. Relationships among employees within organizations, relationships between employees and their leaders and managers in those organizations, relationships between bureaucrats, administrators, and outside external stakeholders, relationships between bureaucrats and overseers in terms of elected officials. So we study these relationships between these people who are vested with administrative authority to carry out public programs. And this is one of those major differences between the two sectors. These bureaucrats, these administrators in the public sector are vested with administrative authority. Why? Because the programs that they are carrying out come to them from enabling legislation. So these programs, these organizations, these policies are created by legislatures. Since they're created in law by legislatures, that then provides this formal authority that oftentimes you lack in private corporations. So we study these relationships within our public organizations, and authority and power is a major element of those relationships that we are studying. The problem is that people tend to have a very negative view of the bureaucracy. And Charles Goodsell told us that all the way back in 1970 in his classic book, The Case for the Bureaucracy, where he says that people will base their opinion of government organizations on the experiences that they've had interfacing with those organizations. So somebody may have had 10 different experiences with an organization. None of those experiences were good, but that one negative experience is probably going to be enough to give them a negative view of not only that organization, but the entire bureaucracy writ large. So people tend to think that bureaucracies are too inefficient to do anything of any good. But at the same time, they are staffed by bureaucrats, by administrators, who are very efficient users and sometimes abusers of their authority. So the organizations are seen as being inefficient, but the bureaucrats are being seen as being relatively efficient in abusing the authority that's given to them. So you can see we have some very negative types of viewpoints that we have to work against with public administration. And there's a whole body of literature in public administration that talks about the inherent role of public leaders as being what's called expository leaders. And when you say they're expository leaders, we mean that they need to go out there and role model. They need to establish these expectations of trustworthiness, these expectations of following law and doing things in an ethical manner, as we had talked about in class last week. The problem for the field of public administration, not only is it oftentimes held in relatively low regard by citizens, but it also has suffered from a crisis of identity in that it's been difficult for public administration to separate itself from private administration. MPA degrees sometimes are difficult for the public to distinguish from MBA degrees. And I always point out the example of Willamette University up in the state of Oregon. And in their MPA program, they have blended the MBA and the MPA degrees together to such a degree that the culminating case study that students do each year will cycle back and forth between a private sector case and then a public sector case. So one year they'll do a case that deals with a private corporation. The next year, they'll do a case that deals with a public organization, and then so on and so on. So they have really blended their programs together that much. However, when you look at MPA programs across the country, typically most MPA programs are divorced from MBA programs. Most MPA programs are not delivered within a college of business. You look at here at Long Beach, our MPA program is delivered by the Graduate Center for Public Policy Administration. We are housed in the College of Health and Human Services. The MBA program is actually housed within the College of Business, a completely different college in the infrastructure of the university. But we oftentimes struggle to show how we are different from the private sector. Well, you know, my favorite question is, so what? Well, so what? What's the difference? Why do we have to show that we are separate from the private sector? If we want to make the argument that we are a separate academic discipline in public administration, it means that the type of phenomena that we study must be unique and different from the phenomena that are studied in a college of business. The tools and the methodologies that we use to study those phenomena must be unique and different from the tools and the methodologies used in business programs. And so if we really want to show ourselves as a separate academic discipline, we really do have to kind of show these differences between what we do here in PA versus what would be done over in a college of business. There are a few really defining differences between the public and the private sectors. One of those defining differences is the role of public authority that we already mentioned earlier. In the public sector, we are working in governmental organizations that are created through legislation. We're implementing policies and programs that are created through legislation. So there is this inherent role of public authority that we have in the public sector that you don't necessarily see in the private sector. Whenever we want to define if something is a government, you know, there are a lot of institutions around the world that call themselves governments. But in order to truly be a government, you really have to meet two different criteria. One criteria is to have control over a jurisdiction. Control over a jurisdiction means power and authority over that jurisdiction. The second thing that governments need to have is they need to have coercive ability. They need to be able to coerce their citizens to do things those citizens may not otherwise do, to do some things that may run contrary to their rational self-interest. So things such as paying taxes. If someone was operating just in a very myopic, rational self-interest, they're not going to be inclined to pay taxes. But we need people to pay taxes to provide for the general welfare of society. So government can force you to pay taxes. Government can force you to serve on a jury. We need people to serve on juries. So we have that constitutional protection of due process. And so you have the right to a jury trial. Even in a civil case, you have a right to a jury trial according to the Seventh Amendment. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we can staff those juries so we coerce people to do jury duty. We sometimes, in times of war, we have to coerce people to serve in the military. We have to have a military draft. So that type of public authority is something that is unique to the public sector that we don't really see over with private corporations. Another major distinction are these characteristic organizational processes that we see in the public sector. So how we manage our employees, how we manage our money, those types of things are somewhat different in the public as compared to the private sector. And we'll get into more of that in granular detail in a second when we talk about the Graham Allison article. We know that there is a similarity, though, between public and private sectors in that both public and private organizations contribute to policy execution. Both sectors contribute to the successful implementation of public policies. When you think about a policy such as a regulatory policy, so a regulatory policy that will regulate the quality of water or the quality of air, If we are going to successfully implement those regulatory requirements, we are going to have to get the compliance and the acquiescence of private sector corporations. Those private sector corporations that are creating those goods that may result in pollution, they need to cooperate in reducing pollution and cleaning that pollution up as necessary. So private sector corporations will engage in policy execution and implementation. They will help the implementation of these public policies. The difference, though, is that when it comes to policy formulation, the actual creation of these public policies, that's where we see a role for the public sector and not so much of a role for the private sector. So in policy formulation, as administrators, we are involved in providing our expertise and our advice to elected officials as they put these policies together. We provide our expertise and our knowledge when it comes to writing the administrative rules that will govern the implementation of these policies. We are very much involved in the policy formulation process. But I think one thing that really does crystallize for us very well the major differences between public and private organizations is this thing known as the Federal Anti-Deficiency Act. The Federal Anti-Deficiency Act has been around for many, many years, but it's still a very important law. It forbids government officials from spending money on anything that is not explicitly authorized by law. In other words, we can only spend money on things that the money is legally appropriated for. So Congress must first appropriate that money and say, this is what the money is to be spent for. And once we have that appropriation, then we have the legal authority to spend that money. We know in the Constitution, there is this thing called the Appropriations Clause. And the Appropriations Clause tells us that before Congress can remove money from the national treasury, it must first do so in the consequence of appropriations, meaning that it must say this is what this money is being spent on. So we can only spend money on what the law tells us we can spend the money on. Contrast that to private organizations. Private organizations have the flexibility to spend their money on anything that they want as long as it's not forbidden by law. So they can do whatever they want as long as it's not against the law. We can only do what is in the furtherance of implementing a law. So we can only do what the law tells us to do. Private organizations can do whatever they want as long as it's not forbidden by law. That's a really good example of the fundamental differences between public and private sector organizations. And not to belabor the point too much, because I know we have some limited time we're working under tonight, but great example of this Anti-Deficiency Act, if I haven't mentioned it before, was in the last administration. In the last administration, we had a situation where we had a brand new tax law, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was an attempt to overhaul the federal income tax code. And so what it did is it added on a bunch of new deductions for businesses. It lowered the tax rates across all the tax brackets. It also removed these things called exemptions, and exemptions were there to try and adjust for family size. Those are removed from as a part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. In addition, it also limited the state and local tax deduction to $10,000. So it made a lot of fundamental changes to income tax code. However, once that law passed, it changed the way in which people were filing their taxes. The problem was that at the same time, we also had a partial government shutdown, where Congress was unable to come to agreement on a handful of appropriation bills. One of those appropriation bills was the appropriation bill for the Department of Treasury. So once the new fiscal year started on October 1st, the Department of Treasury essentially did not have a budget. They didn't have legal authority to go out there and spend money. So what Congress did to try and keep the Department of Treasury operating is that it provided a continuing resolution. And that continuing resolution said that we will fund the Department of Treasury and all these other departments that did not yet have their appropriation bills passed. we will fund them at 80% of what they were funded at last year. And we'll do that for a temporary period of time. We'll do that for the next 2 weeks. The hope is that over those 2 weeks, Congress would then come to an agreement on those appropriation bills. Congress did not come to an agreement. So Congress then said, we'll pass another continuing resolution, and then another one, and then another one, until we finally get into December. And once we hit late December, we then have Congress and the president deciding no more continuing resolutions. And when we run out of continuing resolutions, you have a government shutdown, or at least a partial government shutdown, because there is not any legal authority for these agencies to go out there and spend money. The Internal Revenue Service is part of the Department of Treasury, so it was directly affected by this partial government shutdown in January. Well, what else happens in January? Taxpayers are starting to file their taxes. So we've got a bunch of taxpayers that are getting on the phone, calling the IRS, trying to find out what this new law meant for how they file their taxes. And there was no one to answer the phones at the IRS because all these agents had been furloughed and told to stay home because there wasn't money to pay them. The White House decided they wanted these agents to come back to work. So they said they're going to order these agents back to work, and then they're going to pay these agents by taking money from a different appropriation. Well, obviously, Congress cried foul and said that's a violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act. You cannot pay these agents with money that has not been appropriated for the specific purpose of paying these agents. So we are very limited in the public sector in terms of what we can spend our money on, much more limited than you would be over in a private corporation. Graham Allison, in his article, and this is number 35, I believe it is, in the classics text, I think does a very nice job of really telling us about some of the primary similarities and differences between public and private sector organizations. Alice in his article, and his article is titled, I always get the title wrong, I don't have my book with me, but it's Public and Private Sectors, Are They Alike in All Unimportant Respects? Meaning that there are similarities between public and private organizations, but how important are those similarities? And are they different in more important respects than they are similar? So what Allison tells us is he tells us there are certain types of functions that are done both in the public as well as the private sector. So he said, if you think about what leaders and managers do in a corporation versus what they do in a public organization, all leaders and managers, regardless of what sector they are in, they're going to have to engage in planning. So they engage in strategic planning. So they will plan out the operations of their organizations. All leaders do that. Not only do they engage in planning, but they're going to engage in the function of organizing as well. And by organizing, they're going to organize the operations within their organization. So you've got all these different disparate elements in your organization. You have to organize who does what and the responsibilities and the power and authority of all the different people and positions within our organization. That organization chart is organizing those types of operations. Private sector and public organizations both have organization charts. They also have to engage in staffing. They have to get people into their organizations who have the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to do the work that is required. So everybody has to hire. Everybody has to engage in directing. All leaders and managers have to direct their employees in what to do and how to do those jobs. They have to engage in coordination. They have to coordinate the work of all these disparate elements within the organization. They have to engage in reporting. That's another basic function of management. We have to report in terms of how we are spending the money. We have to report how well we are spending the money, what type of progress we are making toward the achievement of our organizational goals and objectives. And we also have to all engage in budgeting. We have to get money into our organization. We need these precious resources that will allow us to pay our employees, that will allow us to buy supplies and pay for maintenance and utilities and all these good things that keep our organizations running on a daily basis. These functions, planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting, these are what we call the generic management functions. They are true for both sectors. So that's the primary similarity between public and private organizations. However, Allison says, even though we're all doing the same types of functions, the difference lies in how we are doing those functions, how we carry out planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budget. And some of the examples that Allison provides for us in the differences in how these things are done between sectors. Take a look at staffing. In terms of staffing, we have different types of employees that we hire in the private versus the public sector. Employees in the private sector are at-will employees. So they are hired at the will of the organization. They maintain their jobs at the will of the organization. So you can hire someone the same day that they come in for an interview. So if you can get them processed through HR fast enough, get them on payroll, they can start the same day. In the public sector, we are dealing with career civil servants. And so the hiring of a career civil servant is a much more protracted process. If you're currently working in a public organization, your hiring process may have taken 3 or 6, maybe 9 months, because there are a lot of steps that you need to go through in hiring someone to work in a public organization. There's a vetting process. We also have to be mindful of values such as social equity, representative bureaucracy, to make sure that we are putting together an organization that is representative and reflective of the population that it is serving. And I won't go through the protracted example of how that happens here at Cal State Long Beach, but suffice to say, whenever we go out there to hire a faculty member, and I was chair during the hiring of 2 full-time tenure track faculty members, we have to do it in conjunction with the Office of Equity and Diversity. So the job announcement, before we can post this job advertisement, that advertisement must be approved by the Office of Equity and Diversity. We have to formulate a recruitment plan that also has to be approved by the Office of Equity and Diversity. Once we advertise the position and we then have people applying, that applicant pool must then also be approved by Equity and Diversity. Then whenever we select our semifinalists to conduct phone interviews with, that semifinalist pool also has to be approved. Once we narrow it down to our 3 on-campus finalists, that finalist pool must also then be approved. The questions we use in those interviews all must be approved. So you can see there's a very long, very detailed process that we go through here at Cal State Long Beach. In a private university, the process may not be quite as detailed in that you may not have the same types of administrative regulations that you have to follow when hiring a faculty member. So the hiring process is much different. The management process of personnel in the staffing function is much different as well. If you're in the private sector and you have all at-will employees, you can sanction and discipline those employees and terminate them if necessary without a whole lot of documentation. In the public sector, because these are career civil servants, they are hired based upon their knowledge, skills, and abilities. They have certain civil service protections. So if you're going to sanction, discipline, and eventually terminate an employee, you have to document every step of the process. You have to document subpar performance. You then have to provide opportunities for training and development to mitigate that subpar performance. You then have to reevaluate the employee's performance. If it's still not up to standards, then you have to go and provide more training and development, and so on and so on and so on, because these employees have these career civil service protections. Overlay on top of that the fact that public employees are 3 times more likely to be unionized than their private sector counterparts. When you are dealing with public employee unions, it means that you're dealing with a collective bargaining agreement. That collective bargaining agreement will then spell out all the personnel functions that you have to engage in. So how you offer training and development will be spelled out in that CBA. How you promote people, will the process will be spelled out in the CBA. How people are sanctioned, disciplined, and perhaps terminated will all be spelled out in that collective bargaining agreement as well. So you not only are limited by career civil service, but you're also limited by collective bargaining agreements. So much more limitations in how we manage personnel in the public compared to the private sector. Our performance measurement, our ability to measure performance is different in the public sector as well. A lot of the goods and services that we create in the public sector tend to be more of these, what we call softer goods, in that they're more qualitative in nature. They don't carry with them the same quantitative numerical standards that you might have in the private sector. So if you're running a widget factory in the private sector, you're making widgets, you can very quantitatively measure the amount of widgets that you are making compared to the amount of money you're spending in making those widgets. You can quantitatively measure the quality of those widgets and how close in quality those widgets are. It's a very quantitative, empirical type of performance measurement. In the public sector, if your ultimate goal is to enhance the quality of life of citizens, that's going to be something that's a lot more qualitative, and it's going to be more difficult to attach numbers to those performance measurements. When it's difficult for us to measure performance of the creation of our outputs, it then also becomes difficult for us to measure the performance of our employees. We have a lot of pay for performance in the private sector, but not nearly as much pay for performance in the public sector, because again, it's difficult to have those quantifiable performance metrics. Competing standards. We have a lot more competing standards in the public sector as compared to the private sector. We talked about this before in terms of the many masters theory, that we serve a legislature, an executive, and a judiciary. We also have to work our way through and navigate our American system of federalism with national, state, and local governments. That overlays on top of us a lot of competing standards and expectations horizontally as well as vertically. You don't have those same competing standards over in the private sector. The amount of public scrutiny. There's scrutiny in both sectors, but the amount of public scrutiny and how we make sure that we are open and transparent in the public sector, much different than in the private sector. When we talked about accountability and ethics, we talked about the Brown Act, we talked about public records laws, conflict of interest forms. Those are all additional administrative things we have to deal with in order to make sure that we are open to public scrutiny. You don't have to worry about doing those same types of things over in the private sector. Because our public sector managers are so limited by career civil service protections, by collective bargaining agreements, it means they do not have the same ability to direct and control the actions of their employees. So instead of relying upon those formal types of authority structures, they will instead rely more on persuasion. And so public managers must be much better at persuasion than their private sector counterparts to make up for this lack of formal authority. Oversight. As we said with our competing standards, we have a lot more oversight regulations in the public as compared to the private sector. We are held accountable for our actions by more actors, by more groups and institutions than what you would see over in the private sector. So what Allison tells us, it's really all about the how. How we carry out our functions will be different in the public as compared to the private sector, which then provides us with more justification for why we have this separate field of study known as public administration. Now, you're probably thinking we haven't talked a whole lot about the profit motive. Usually when people talk about the differences between the sectors, they zero in directly on, well, if there's a profit motive, there's a bottom line in the private sector, there's not a profit motive with public organizations. And for the most part, that is true. However, this is an example of an explanation being necessary, but yet not sufficient. It is necessary to recognize the absence of a profit motive for most public organizations, but we also have to realize that there are some public organizations that do run a profit, or at least are allowed to run a profit. Those organizations are called government corporations. So government corporations such as the U.S. Postal Service is allowed to run a profit. They typically do not, but they are allowed to run a profit much like a private corporation. Over in the private sector, we then have private nonprofit organizations. They're private sector organizations. They're not owned by the public, but they are nonprofit in their orientation, much like what a public organization would be. So we do have kind of this gray area where some public organizations have a profit motive, some private organizations do not have a profit motive. So it's a necessary distinction, but yet not sufficient. Another distinction between the two sectors that is useful that we introduced at the outset of this discussion tonight was this distinction between policy formulation and policy execution. Now, both sectors are involved in policy execution, but it's really only the public sector that is fully involved in policy formulation as well. So the primary difference between execution and formulation, in policy execution, this is the task of actually carrying out these policies, actually putting these policies into action, actually implementing these public policies. That's policy execution. As we said, private sector corporations will contribute to that, especially with regulatory policies, and public sector organizations are the ones who are primarily responsible for the implementation of these policies. But when it comes to formulation, we see much more of a role for the public sector. Public organizations and public administrators are involved in policy formulation in a variety of different ways. One way they're involved is before the policy is actually designed, they will advise elected officials in the design of that policy. Elected officials are probably not experts in this policy area. They have not been on the ground in agencies implementing these policies, so they reach out to administrators, and those administrators then bring their expertise to bear on the design of these policies. Another way where administrators are involved in formulation is making sense of these policies after they have already been passed. So once a law is passed, it will be passed in a relatively vague and very vague and ambiguous fashion. In order to get a majority of Congress to approve something, it has to be relatively vague and ambiguous. So vague and ambiguous that there aren't real good directions about how to implement this policy. Then left up to the administrators through the administrative rulemaking process to write those rules that will govern the implementation of this policy. That's part of policy formulation as well. Well, to go back to our so what question here again, well, so what? So we have administrators involved in policy formulation. What is the impact of that on our public policies? I think the impact is really twofold. One impact of having administrators involved in policy formulation is it's increased the technicality of public policies. That whenever you have these expert administrators involved in the design of the policy, they will bring with them jargon, they will bring with them technical aspects that will then be incorporated into the policy that would not be in that policy if those administrators had not been involved. So we get much more technical, much more jargon-laden types of policies. The second implication of having administrators involved in policy formulation is that it greatly expands the role of the chief executive. Public organizations are situated within the executive branch. Typically, whether we're at the federal level or at the state level, they are housed in the executive branch. We know from our knowledge of the Constitution that presidents are the heads of the executive branch. And presidents are the heads of the executive branch through their ability to appoint people to the heads of these agencies and departments, as well as through their ability to require the opinions of these executive officials. So those two clauses in Article 2 of the Constitution makes the president the chief executive. So whenever you are involving public organizations, executive organizations in the policy formulation process, you are by definition giving more influence to the chief executive, because the chief executive can influence the policy formulation through these organizations. So they kind of use these public organizations as the conduit through which they can have an impact upon the formulation of these policies. So up to this point in time, what we have done is I think we've provided somewhat a justification for why we study public administration differently than we study private administration. It's kind of the how of what we are doing as opposed to the functions that we do. Since what we are doing and how we are doing it is so different in the public sector, it kind of justifies this idea of a separate study of administration. That separate study of administration was really first talked about in Woodrow Wilson's article, The Study of Administration, published way back in 1887. This is where we're going to pick up our discussion next week. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, I would ask that you take a look at the Wilson article. It's in the classics textbook, and see what his argument is about this whole idea of the study of administration and this whole concept that he coins known as the politics administration dichotomy. We'll then take that as a jumping off point to continue our discussion next week about public administration, to kind of come to a conclusion about, is public administration an academic discipline, or is it just a part of another discipline, or is it just part of a discipline like political science? To truly be an academic discipline, you need to be unique. You need to be unique in terms of the phenomena that you are studying. You also need to be unique in how you study those phenomena. And since we are an introductory course in an MPA program, I think it's very important that we really broach this topic of not just what is public administration, but is public administration really its own academic discipline? So we'll do that in the first part of class next week. Then the second part of class, we will talk about the evolution of the literature in public administration. And I'll take you through about 150 years of the development of our approaches to how we study public bureaucracies and how those approaches have kind of evolved from kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to a much more nuanced recognition that we need to understand the situation and understand the context of the situation. Hence my favorite answer, which is it depends. So that's kind of where we are, and that's where we are going for next week. So next week, the midterm is not due, but you still have a Canvas essay due. And the Canvas essay that's due next week will pick up on this information we talked about tonight. I'm asking that you select a public organization. It could be your own organization. It could be a different organization, completely up to you. And then highlight two similarities and two differences between that public organization and a corollary organization in the private sector. So just a chance to kind of work through some of this information and apply it in a Canvas essay. Okay, we finished all that information up on time. Do you have any questions on any of this information that we have covered here in the second half of class tonight? Okay. If not, then I think we'll call it quits for the night, and we'll come back next week and start with Woodrow Wilson, his study of administration. And I'll have this recording all finished and all ready to go, hopefully by tomorrow morning. So I'll have it linked up. I'll try and put the right link on there. But I'll have it linked up onto our Canvas site if you need to go back and review any of this information. Any questions emerge to you on the midterm assessment or our next Canvas essay, send me an email. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great remainder of your week, and I'll talk to you then again at 4 o'clock next Wednesday. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Dr. Powell. Good night.
Thank you. Thanks.